Okay, my name is Marie Palesi, Mariepalesi.
Great. And
Do you want my?
when and where you were born?
I was born in San Francisco, June the 20th, 1914. And
Great, great. Okay, so like I said, I'm going to focus on. I want to hear about what you feel your contributions were to those times in the war effort, possibly, and how it affected you. So why don't you give me kind of an idea of what you were doing right before kind of things happened in your normal life situation before the war kind of broke out.
before the war, I was working as a jeweler, and then I also was a volunteer at a draft board because draft was beginning. And so at night when I got home, I would go to the draft board and I would interview or question or swear somebody in. And I had power of notary at the time, so it was essential. And so I enjoyed the work immensely. Of course, it gave me this good military feeling that I should be doing something more. And of course, I began reading up on what we should do and shouldn't do. And then the government told us we had to get out of non-essential work and get into something to help the government. And so I went to school, and took a machine shop, and I became a machinist in time, and I got a job in the machine shop, and so I was kept busy, and I enjoyed the work because I had so many brothers that I never played with dolls. I used to go in my father's shop downstairs and use the same tools my brothers did, working on the lathe and stuff. So I really enjoyed being a machinist.
Great.
And but daily I would walk by a recruiting office, and I was waiting for the Army to take over the WAACS, which was a women's auxiliary, and it was not. It was military in a sense, but it was not the government. So then when the government did take over, then I decided I should stop and question them and put my name in. And they told me to wait as they were getting a group of women. It was going to be an all-California group of women. And there were quite a few. And in time, they got the full enlistment from everybody, all the women. And I went in, signed up, and I waited at home. And they called me one night. I got a courier come to the door at 1 in the morning and gave me my papers to report the next morning at the Presidio in San Francisco. And of course I was excited, and I did go there, and we were all sworn in, and it was quite a group of women, and I got sworn in, and then I was told to go home and they'd call me again. And I got my notice again, and packed my little bag, and my mom and dad came with me. We took the ferry boat to Oakland. This is where we were going to go by train to wherever we were supposed to go. Of course, it was Fort Oglethorpe in Georgia, and of course, it's going to be my first time away from home, and I was quite excited and wondering what was going to happen next. So we finally got across the United States. We would always have to pull over and let other trains by that were essential. And it seemed like it took us forever to get to Georgia. And finally we did get to Georgia, and of course it was quite a train load. And we were all dressed, you know, high heels, silk stockings, and all that. We didn't know what to expect. We found out real quick. And anyway, they didn't have our uniforms ready. Everything was such a rush job that we didn't have the proper clothing. So we stayed with our civilian clothes for a few days, and finally the clothing began to arrive. Of course, instead of silk stockings, we had cotton stockings like grandmother's, and the shoes were grandmother's shoes. And then we also got our uniforms, which were heavy wool, and hats we got were called hobby hats. They were like the Cubans have now, and I think we gave them to them. But anyhow, we had to use that. And being wintertime, it was fine to have the heavy clothes. And then, of course, they had to have them tailored. By tailoring, I mean shorten, let them out, whatever, to fit us.
Right.
And then the next step was going to the infirmary, and they lined us up, began giving us shots in our right arm, left arms, and then we'd go outside and we'd see people looking limp, and we found out what that was, because then we did it too. We tried to scare the next people. And so in order not to make sore muscles, or they gave us rakes and brooms and everything. We had to rake the area, clean it up, and lawnmowers and all that. So by then we were pretty hungry people, because they said the WACs ate all the time. And I think we did. And so then we settled in. We were given our barracks and all that, but there were no men there at all. Thank goodness for a while.
So let me
Yeah,
back
go
up for a
ahead.
second. So about how old were you here when you went into the WACs?
How?
How old were you?
Oh, I was 29 years old. I wasn't a kid at the time.
And were you married or anything like that at this time, or
Where I what?
were you married, or
No,
was there any relationship?
no,
So
no attachments.
okay.
Yeah, I figured there wouldn't be till the war was over. I went there for a purpose. And of course I had a couple of brothers in the Air Force, and so I wasn't about to not help them. I mean, this was one of the main things. Yeah, do what I could.
So you consciously kind of said no serious relationship until you're
That's
done
right.
with your...
No, yeah, just go on with what we had to do, because it was a very serious thing we were going into. And so with that, what else?
So as a woman back then, did you, because, you know, not having been there, my vision of it is that, you know, the women were in the home and the men did the men work and went to war and stuff. Did you kind of have that attitude, or did you think you had a different attitude by then because of growing up with boys and stuff?
Well,
how were you thinking back?
how was I thinking? I was trying to fit in. I mean, we all were trying to do our best, but I was always a mechanic. I mean, basically, yeah. And but in the as one of our officers called it, the female concentration camp, where there were no men, you just did like the rest did. I mean, it was always feminine, you know. But anyhow, we had rough things to do, you know. I mean, we had to hike. I think we hiked a lot, and they would take us out in the woods and lose us. And of course, we had to find our way back, which we usually did. And we didn't have all of the rough times that or rough training that the women did later. It was more, I don't know how to explain it, but these rules hadn't come in yet. We weren't allowed to handle a gun or anything like they do today. Today they have sharpshooters and such, and so we didn't have anything like that.
Did you want to?
Well, I knew how before, but I
Right.
didn't want to. No, there was no reason to. I'm not that brave.
Right.
So anyhow, we did have a lot of training. We had schooling, we had classes, and one of the things, in order to make us fit in, they had us in rooms, classrooms, and we had to learn to huff and puff so we wouldn't have squeaky voices. We would have to go sit there and go, change our voices, because they didn't want any officer or any cadre to walk around and say, "Attention!" They wanted you to say it in a strong voice. So we had classes in that. It was amazing. Yeah.
I've never heard that in the interviews before.
You never heard that before?
So they had voice training like classes?
Yeah. We had to get deep voices because, I mean, you couldn't be out in the field patrolling a march or something and squeak. So that was an interesting part of it. And then we had training in the gas chamber, and you go in there and with your gas mask not on, and then they turn on the gas or the fumes, whatever. And then you had to put your masks on quick. So we had to learn that real fast, yeah. And then they would take us out to an area where they were showing us flamethrowers, bombs, showing us how hand grenades would go off, teaching us these cruel things.
Kind of what to expect, maybe? If
Yes. And I didn't, the most terrible one was the flamethrower, I think. Yeah. But I guess it was necessary. Yeah. War.
Yes.
Yeah.
So on the gas mask, did you have any problems with it? Did you get it off
With the gas?
on right the first time, or did you have to do it a couple of times? Or?
Well, it's pretty, well, you pay attention when they're teaching you first. And then you go in there and it's up to you. But some of us couldn't get them on fast enough. And sickening.
What
Yeah.
What happens if you don't?
Well, they let you out quick. And then you start breathing, trying to get the ugly taste out. Yeah. And that wasn't fun,
No.
but it was necessary. Yeah, and then we had the tower where they did the parachute jumping, but it was like a bungee cord jump, yeah, so.
And you did that?
Yeah, and we learned all about parachutes, of course, but not like we did when I was in the Air Force, yeah. And, of course, every Saturday morning we had parade and review, and because I was the shortest, I think I was on the whip end where the tall person would be still and I'd be running around. I couldn't figure that out. It was like ice skating and whip at the end of the whip.
So you'd have to do a lot, like twice as much walking.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I could do it real good. I got used to it. But then we also tried to be the best. And of course, we get, I'd say, merits for being the best if we won that day or whatever, yeah.
And what would make you the best?
Well, us marching uniformly, where we would be perfect, so to speak, yeah. And we tried.
Straight lines?
Straight lines, absolutely.
Left foot,
Correct.
right foot? And
Yeah, we didn't have to carry stones in our hands to know the left from the right. Well, it took time, believe me. Yeah, because you're a bunch of civilians and you didn't do it before, unless you were in a high school band or something. So it was pretty well. And I enjoyed a lot of it. I mean, it got lonesome after a while, you know, you miss your family. And we had a lot of schooling on protocol for the Army. And I was not unhappy with it because that's why I was there, to do my best.
We interviewed a woman that when she got to the WACS, they had at the USO a little record recording machine, and she recorded a message to her folks. And
To
some of
home?
that, yeah. Did you do any of that kind of stuff when you got there, writing letters,
Oh,
recording?
yes, yes.
And what
If we
was your first thoughts like when you first got there and you're writing back to your parents?
writing, say, well, we miss you, of course, but how strange it was, um, and of course, a lot of the women were from your hometown, and some were not, but we weren't separated. I mean, we're just, 60 to a barracks, and
So you
that's
had
where.
friends there that.
Oh yeah, I had friends there. Yeah, of course. Then I had to leave them all.
Yeah.
But anyhow, we had bunk beds. We didn't have cots at the time, and of course, I guess I was hopping around all the time. So the girls decided I should have a top bunk because I was youngest. I wasn't the youngest. I could climb better. But we had a we had good friendships in there. And then, of course, it was marching to meals. And then we got up early in the morning, about 5. And we had to march a lot of mornings, even though it wasn't Saturday. And in the winter, it's surprising how cold it is in Georgia, in Fort Oglethorpe. Yeah, there were, I don't know, I called it snow on the trees. May have been frost, but it was cold. Yeah.
Yeah, I would have thought it would be hot and muggy the whole time.
Yeah. Summertime is hot, yeah. But we had no inside plumbing, of course. We had, since Fort Oglethorpe had been a cavalry post, they had barns, and we had to walk about 100 feet from the barracks to the showers and latrines. And they had the stables. It had been stables, big cement floors, walls, and they converted that to latrines and showers. So you had to walk all the way down there in the morning when it was cold to take showers. We had no heat there. We had no heat in the barracks either. We weren't allowed to burn. Yeah, we had to be tough.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, yeah.
So is this what we'd call boot camp
Yeah,
today?
actually, it was boot camp. Yeah.
And how long did they keep you there doing that?
Well, we went in, got there in October, and it was December, near Christmas, when we graduated. It's got, I think, November or whatever. We had our graduation. And at that time, there were still some people, young ladies, that were going to get married when they graduated. And families came for the graduation. They had the weddings, and so it was kind of nice. And one poor young lady was crying because she had cotton stockings. She needed nylons for her wedding, and I had some, so I gave her a pair. That was her wedding present. But and some of the girls that came there, actually, I knew their families, and I didn't realize who they were because they split us up in different barracks. Yeah, and when I finally saw them at graduation, it was like old home week. Yeah.
That's cool. So was there any kind of free time during this time that you guys could just hang out in the barracks and do stuff, or did they keep you busy the whole time?
Well,
What was life in the barracks?
we had about 2 weeks free time, and we could go to town if we wished, and there'd be a bus taking us. And of course, that's when the commanding officer would say, "Hey, you know about the birds and bees, you're free now, watch it." Yeah, like we were youngsters. But there were some young ladies. There were some girls that were real good, and they had been to boarding school because they were children of people in the military, and they enlisted. And so it turned out to be a nice bunch, yeah.
So did you have women that were, let's say, like you said, the proper, everything ladylike, and did you have
Oh,
a
yes.
whole wide range of women that were like more
Like me,
fun and party kind of?
yeah, yeah.
So you have,
There were some sort of, they got cliquey, but on the whole, we were all friends. I mean, we were there actually for a purpose. And of course, there's always someone who, we played games like short sheeting and put straw on beds and stuff, and there's always one or two that had relatives that were admirals and stuff, and they were going to get even with us. They were going to squeal on us and stuff. And like the day before, a couple days before graduation, we decided to start cutting up real good. So when it was time, 5 o'clock, to get up and go out and exercise, fall in for roll call, we kept our pajamas on, and we just rolled them up and put our top coats on and went outside. And when the officer yelled attention, we let everything go, let our pajamas, everything come down. She said, "Thank God," she says, "I was beginning to think you were all dead." So she found out that we were real.
so would you say you were like a prankster kind of person, or were you coming up with these ideas yourself, or you?
I was sort of I would say a leader, but I liked jokes and such. So I was always doing something, like instigating. Yeah.
So when you go on your breaks to town, what things would you do in town
In
to get away
town,
from the
mainly
boot
we
camp
would
life?
go have a meal. We would go and have a breakfast or something. And but there was always people that were so nice. They'd come over to the table and say, "Your meal is paid for. We have a daughter in the service or family," and people were kind. Yeah, they would do that, or we would go to the store or something. Yeah, nothing too drastic because we always wanted to get back. Yeah, I think we were afraid of the public after that.
So did you see a definite difference in how you were treated at, say, before when you were a civilian and then when you became?
They treated us real good. I mean, I think we were honored by a lot of people, yeah, for that, yeah.
And how did that make you feel when you?
Pardon?
How did that make you feel when you
It,
started seeing that you were treated
very
differently?
good. That was very good, yeah, yeah. It's, like I said, made you feel honored, yeah. Yeah, so.
And well, like even more patriotic, so let's say, or that you were
Yes,
you
it
were doing
was
a
a
good.
very patriotic time, yes. I felt the flag to me meant everything, yeah. So we were taught that at home to begin with, yeah. Ever since we were little, my folks taught us the Pledge of Allegiance, everything we had to, yeah. So
So when Pearl Harbor was hit, do you remember that?
Pearl Harbor, yes,
And
I can
do you remember
remember
kind of what was going on at the time, how you felt, and what you were doing
at
at
the
the time?
time. Oh, we had, well, I'll say like a country home in Mountain View, California, and we had gone there for the weekend because we always raised vegetables and stuff there. So we call that our weekend home. And we were sitting around having coffee in the morning and chit-chatting, my folks and who of us at the family that was still home. And all of a sudden we heard this, that we were listening to the radio. The radio stopped. They said, Pearl Harbor has just been bombed. I mean, it was such a shock, you know. And one of the facts was that one of my brothers had been in already, and he was supposed to have been going, he was on a ship, and there was in a convoy. And so it was frightening. We said, oh my God. So we decided to just pack up and go back to San Francisco, which we did. And we found out the Japanese said they had sunken the ships in the convoy, and my brother was on President Johnson, and we didn't hear from him for, it was about 6 months later. The government sent us a card and said, safe, sound, well, and happy. It was supposed to be for my brother. But a boiler had, he told me later, a boiler had blown up on the ship, so they turned around and came back to California. And so he was at Hamilton Field when we got the letter. And so.
But you didn't know for 6 months? And he didn't realize you didn't know?
Well, you know, it's
Wow.
so funny. You wouldn't believe this, but when he came out, he was in 20 years, they wouldn't give him a certain medal for Pearl Harbor. He was on the ocean at the time, and if you're in them, you get the Pearl Harbor medal. Well, they never gave it, and years later, there was a movie on about the ship had been sunk and all these fellas were in the water. Okay, that's a story. That was a true story, and the reason that we never knew anything about these sinkings and where my brother was, because they didn't want the Japanese to know how many ships they had. Now, this was a government secret, and we didn't find out till later when they let the news out. And I mean, this is maybe going back about 10 years from now. So it was a secret.
Wow.
Yeah, to protect the amount of ships and such we had. Yeah.
Right. So were you working at the draft office when this happened?
I was at the draft office yet.
Okay.
And that's when it began to get hot and heavy. And I was working in the machine shop by then. And so this all was, well, how can I say it?
So it got a lot busy after Pearl Harbor. Your job at the draft board got a lot busier?
Oh, yes, absolutely. They began to call in a lot more, yeah. And you'd be surprised the excuses a lot of the young men had. And I mean, I can see that now, but at the time I thought that was awful. They do anything to get out of it, you know? Yeah.
So that's interesting because I haven't heard that before. What kind of excuses and because we always have this history says it was like this mass people just I want to go like crazy.
Yeah.
But I've never heard that there was actual people.
Well,
a lot of people.
we had one young man come in one night, and he was supposed to come back to be sworn in. He said he couldn't because he had married this woman with 5 children. Anything to get out of it. He didn't get out of it, of course. No.
So did you make the decision whether he went or not, or did you just like
No,
take the
no,
stories down or
no,
something?
no. I didn't make. We had the head of it there, the man, Mr. Sylvie, the man in charge. Yeah. There was a regular board that made the choice. Yeah. Yeah.
So what was your actual job there when these guys would come in?
It was my job to write them in, make sure they came in, swear them in when they did. And so each draft board had quite a few because, I mean, they really took in a lot of men, yeah. So
Any other excuses that you remember?
anymore.
Or
Well, usually it was had to take care of a sick mother or any excuse they could think of, but a lot of them were legitimate, you know.
Yeah.
But it would depend on how many in the family, if somebody could take care of that parent or whatever. I mean,
Did you have the opposite though? Did you have a lot of guys
volunteer.
coming
Oh
in,
yeah,
like,
they
say,
came in
signing
willingly.
up?
Yeah, they really did, yeah. I mean, it was a patriotic time, yeah, yeah. So,
And what are the ages? Because I've heard stories from 13, lying about their ages and stuff. Did you ever run into
uh,
anything like little boys coming in and saying,
young boys, yeah, 16, 17, yeah. And we'd have to turn them down, say, come back when you're older, yeah, and I'm sure. But I forget, uh, my brother was 18, and my parents had to go and sign up for him. No, evidently wasn't quite 18, yeah. I never had any women come in, no.
hmm.
I just kept looking up, waiting for it to become Army. Yeah.
So you actually did the swearing in of some of
Yes,
those?
I
So
could swear them in.
how
Yes.
did that process go? What was that like? Do you
Uh,
remember?
well, you swear.
On a
Yes.
Bible kind of thing, or
Yeah. Well, we didn't have the Bible. It's just, I swear this is, yeah. And you swear them in, just like I was sworn in. Yeah. And be down here a certain time, and report for here or there. Yeah.
so was there an actual swear pledge? Do you remember what it was?
Well, my swearing in was more the truth, the truth. And then wherever they went, then they were sworn in like in a group like I was. Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
That's when you become, certainly you're the Army, yeah, or Navy or whatever. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So back at boot camp, you've gone through that, and you graduated.
Yeah.
So what happened then? How did they assign you to someplace?
Well,
What became your job?
all right.
And
They called me. They called me and said my orders had been cut, and so I my transportation was a truck, and with a bunch of the men, and I was sent to Drew Field in Tampa, Florida, and I was the only one out of the group that was sent. I thought, heck, I thought I'd be with some of the other girls. Well, and so we finally got to Drew Field. I had my barracks bag and foot locker and such, and so I'm on the truck, and it was sundown when we got to Drew Field at Tampa, and that was the most, I want to say, wonderful feeling, or to me, it was glorious and sad. But we drove right into Drew Field. We went through the gates, and all of a sudden, cannon went off. They weren't greeting me. The cannon went off, and they, let's see, the bugle blew, and they lowered the flag, retreat. And the sun was out so beautiful, and the flag was there. They were lowering the flag. I mean, that was the most touching feeling I have ever had. I mean, I cry today for Star Spangled Banner. I really do. And so this was my first retreat. And of course, we got out of the truck, and you have to salute the flag. And when it was over, then I drove to headquarters where my commanding officer was. And I was introduced to them. And of course, I was greeted, but I was the only one. And then when I was supposed to find out what I was supposed to do, they had promised me machine shop. And of course, then they said, no, that's for civilians only. So they said, you're going to be a mechanic. You're going to work on the line. And so I was, okay. So they got me settled. And I met a young lady. She wasn't quite young. She'd been in the W.A.C.s, and she was from San Francisco. And she's the first one that greeted me. So we talked about the mayor. She worked for the mayor of San Francisco. And we chit-chatted a bit. Of course, they got me settled in the bunk I was supposed to have. and it was right next to this other young lady, Dorothy. Her name was Bauer at the time, and to this day we're still friends. Yeah, that's over 60 years. Yeah, and anyhow, she was working on the line as a mechanic, but I applied for school then, airplane and engine mechanic school, and they said no, that was out of the question because there was no latrine facilities for women at that school. It was for men only. Look at it today. It's either. So anyway, they said you're just going to have to learn this way. So I did. We had a mechanics ready room. We had a library of all the manuals that we needed, and we have in our classrooms there. We had no furniture. We sat on the floor, cement floor, and that's where we had our lessons. And you just they give you a manual, and you get acquainted with what is what, and then they take you out on the line and put you on a plane with somebody else and say, this is what you're going to be working on. And if you had any problem, you just went into the ready room and you read up on what you were supposed to do. And of course we had our line chief, which he was really wonderful. I worked with a bunch of young people. The only ones that objected to us were the old-timers, very much, yeah. We had no peace from them. And
Like
they
what would they do? I mean,
they just didn't like, oh, you mean, what did they do?
How did you know that they didn't? Did they say stuff to you, or did you just see it in their faces?
They wouldn't, they wouldn't help, or, you know, well, you're a girl, you're a woman, you know. This was the attitude. And, but the young people, it was different with the young guys we worked with. And so there's just me and Dorothy working on the line with the guys. That was it, until much later on, when then there was women, parachute riggers, okay, women in the tower, and doing the calling, you know, and at the desk, like my other friend, you know, which we're still friends, she did the ordering the parts if you needed parts. So there were different phases that the women worked there, but only two of us on the line, which we found great. Dorothy was mechanical, so was I, so it worked out real well. And so we were assigned, like, to a plane with the men, and I was assigned first to Army trainers, and that's where there are 2 seats on the plane, and they call them 8 Army trainers, 6, but they then eventually got to P-40, and then later P-51s or C-47s, and then I was, at the very end, I was assigned to a bomber, a Mitchell bomber, and I was made a crew member on that one. That's where I got wings for being on that, yeah, as a crew member, because I had to fly with it. And let's see, it's called a B-151. Anyhow, it's a Mitchell bomber. I'm beginning to forget, I think.
That's all right. I wouldn't know the difference anyway.
Right.
So, explain to me what the difference between a machinist and a mechanic
Okay,
is.
all right,
Just so I think I know, but
all right. A machinist cuts out parts, works on a lathe, and makes parts to fit. You'll cut on the lathe.
okay.
And but a mechanic will fix a car, a plane, or that's a mechanic who will work on where you have engines. Yeah.
So you're actually in there with nuts and wrenches and stuff like that?
Oh yeah, tool kits. Yeah, we had to carry the big ones like the guys did. Yeah, and We had to check them in every morning and every night. And the planes we were working on, if the plane you were working on, uh, if it needed fixing.
Do you need to take a break or anything?
Hmm?
Take a break or anything?
Oh.
You all right?
I'm wound up.
Okay, that's fine.
We had not cranes, racks, or like a painter has, the big racks. You can't write that down, but I'm Italian. Anyhow, we have to bring out these big things. If it's a big plane, you brought out a big high, what do you call it?
Ladder or a step stool or
Yeah, it's it's a thing you climb up like monkey bars. But scaffolds,
scaffolding,
yeah. And so we would have to take all our own, yeah. And I was taught to pre-flight. They taught me to right there on the line, pre-flight, and then taxi a plane. And so when somebody would fly in a plane, say a P-51, a fighter, they would bring it to headquarters. And if I was assigned to that plane, I would have to go into the plane and get the log and see what the condition of it is. And then I would taxi it down to the line where it's going to be worked on and work on that. And so if it needed gas, I would have to go get the tanker myself and fill it. If you worked on a plane, if you're assigned to it, you do that. You drive the tanker. You could hardly see me in it. Big gas truck. I was like a peanut in it. But I did it, and
so the pilot was
dragged the big hose and fill the plane. Yeah, but it was our responsibility, and so we got that done. We got through our own kind of a school real good because it was learning right there. Yeah, and then when we got a bunch of General Chenault's P-40s in the they call them the Flying Tigers, and they had this big mouth like a shark's face, but we had to strip them. We had to take all that paint off, and so we had to make them silver again. And they gave us big 50-gallon drums of some kind of a gooey stuff, and then we had to cut wax, put it in, and mix it up, and it made a paint remover. And we'd have to do it with paintbrush, and we got our hands all burned with it. And so they thought they'd be good. They gave us cloth gloves, and that kept the stuff in. And if we went out to dinner or anything like that, we'd eat with our dress gloves on because we were ashamed of our hands. But that's the way it was. I mean, that was wartime, It wasn't fancy. And we didn't have the fatigue that they have now, those nice ones all colored. We had just, for exercise and everything, we looked like pantaloons that your grandmother would wear. They're real bushy. I've got pictures of them. And kind of just sort of a wraparound skirt. Yeah, it was a dress like. Or the coveralls. At first when I went in there, the first pair of coveralls they handed me, I was 125 pounds, and the coveralls were a size 44. So I wrapped them around me until they finally got some that could fit us. But they were different fatigues than they have today. They were kind of slacks with 2 pockets and a jacket, yeah. But we always had to wear a hat because the sun was so hot in Florida, yeah. And winter was really cold, yeah.
So, how long were you there in Florida? Was this your whole career there, or did you move from there?
My whole career, except, well, the last 2 months, that was my base anyway, but I was a recruiter for the last 2 months, and it was the war was over, but we couldn't go because we had to stay an extra 6 months. Yeah, and so I was assigned, because of my enthusiasm on the field, I was assigned to recruiting women. So I got quite a few, and so it's good. We traveled to different towns recruiting, and then there was always about 6 of us, but I got the whole 2 months. And but surprising, as old as we were and such like that, we had to, a certain day we had to show up. Well, the chauffeur would come and get us, and we'd have to be there. And our commanding officer, she would be there. I mean, with her flashlight when we drove up, and make sure you got in bed in the barracks. I mean, they really watched us, which was great, I think it was. So we were kind of always protected. But we call, with no disrespect, we called Captain Ward Mammy Yoakum. She looked like Mammy Yoakum. She had been a warden in a women's prison before she joined the service. She wasn't young. She was in her 50s. And she was a good sport. But we gave nicknames to all of them. You know how it is. You've probably heard.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So she was your commanding?
She was our commanding officer. She was good. She was kind.
Were most of your officers, the people above you, were they women?
Oh, they were all women,
Okay.
except where we worked on the line. Then we worked with men. But the whole thing, well, yeah, I mean, we had our own barracks, we had everything our own. But there were men around. They had barracks across the river. There was a river that separated us. It was always dry unless we had a hurricane, which we had. Yeah, yeah.
So they tried to keep the men and the women separate?
Yeah,
pretty
yeah.
much
Everybody,
purposely.
yeah. No man could be in the women's area after a certain time at night. Yeah, yeah.
So how long were you there as a line
Okay.
mechanic? And
Oh, I was at let's see, let's say I was 2 months there. So I was 2 years. That includes the 2 months of recruiting. Yeah.
so a pilot would come in with their plane and park it, and then you'd have to go get
Yeah.
get in,
Yeah.
start it up, and
Yeah.
drive it. I mean, you're
Yeah.
actually driving the plane down.
Yeah.
Technically.
Yeah. And get it down to the line, put chocks on it, and then talk to the line chief, show him the log. Yeah. And that was nice. We'd have women ferry pilots bring planes from different, like Douglas from California, from different places. Yeah. We didn't have B-17s there. They were at MacDill Field. Our runways were not long enough for a big plane like that. But they were big enough for the bomber that I flew in. Yeah. It was a B-25 when I get back to that. Because a B-24 was that other bomber, yeah, which they use for cargo planes. Yeah. But this was good. Now, when I was assigned to that B-25, the bomber, I still remember the pilot's name. I was a member of that crew there. We took a flight, and we had to go. He ended up in Texas, but it was an accident investigation committee. The plane was assigned to go for those. And anyhow, when he got to San Francisco, he said, you guys can go home for a while. And so we got to go home for a couple of days. And, well, the San Francisco airport was not far from where I lived, so it was fine. I got to go home a couple of days. My family come pick me up and brought me back when I had to go back. And we had a nice flight. As a matter of fact, it was sort of luxurious. We stopped at Colorado Springs, and we had picked up another girl. She was going home. Anyhow, we picked her up, and she and I were going to go to see Will Rogers Memorial. And we started up there, and then a Jeep come and got us and said we had to take off right away because it was going to snow and we'd never get out. So we didn't get to see the memorial, and we got out. But he flew over the Grand Canyon, gave us a view. It was sort of leisurely. And the only thing I had to be sure of was going to another plane when we landed, steal a cushion, because Colonel Shoemate was a big fat man. I had to be sure. Yeah.
So you were assigned to this plane. What was your assignment?
Well, my assignment was to help in any mechanical work, but there was one special thing I could do. I was small. I could fit inside of a wheel nacelle, and I could change gas lines and stuff. Because I was small, I could fit in that little space. Yeah, and that was my job, especially if we had to do that on that plane. But
was that like during flight you'd have to change lines? I mean,
no, while we were home base.
okay.
Yeah,
When you were
because
flying on
it's gas lines. Yeah, you have to make sure that there's no leaks or anything. Yeah.
And when you flew on the plane, did you have the duties?
Uh,
Or were you just
no,
flying?
just sit. As a mechanic, you sit, unless you're an engineer. Yeah. So, yeah.
So you never actually flew any planes at all? Did you actually ever get to fly a plane or
No,
even practice?
one of the girls had a pilot's license, so she would rent a plane, and I would go with her. She'd take me up and let me take over.
Oh.
It was a good feeling. Yeah, but she's right there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was never afraid. I was never afraid to fly.
Yeah.
That had been my ambition. I wanted to be a stewardess years and years ago, but my father couldn't see me going to nursing school because at that time you had to be a registered nurse before you could be a hostess. So I never got to do that. So anyway, I made the best of what I had.
So you mentioned that you were patriotic before and had this feeling. So at the end of your 2 years, when your career was over, basically, how did you feel then? Were you
When it was over?
Yeah, after the war's over and
I was lost. A bunch of us tried to get into the RAF, but that was closed. We tried to get into the Waves. That was closed. And so unless I went to Hawaii or Italy as a cook, that was it. So I said, oh, well, I got to go home. But it hurt. You know what I mean? I wanted to stay in, yeah. But it wasn't meant to be, I guess. Yeah. Well, my career started, I can show you my Army career. From home to go to school. And when I went to school, I would run away, follow my brothers to school. And the teacher would always call my mother and say, come get your daughter, come get your daughter. She's not old enough. So finally they got tired of it and they kept me. And so it was armistice, and the little boy came to school with his one sailor, one soldier. So the teacher dressed me as a nurse, and she took a picture. She gave it to my mother. Well, that picture kind of got destroyed, but my nephew was good with the computer, so he got it together. The injured ones are on the back, but anyway, my mother and her lady friends always looked out the window when I was coming from school, and they said I kissed the boys goodbye. And I said that continued. I never stopped kissing the boys goodbye. Yeah, and this was my last.
As a woman, how or if or anything, did it change your life? And how did you feel about that?
Well, actually, say it changed my life completely. I never felt like I'd gotten out of the service. I've always tried to live up to it. And, you know, I mean, and anything I can help out people with, I do it yet. Yeah. So it really has shaped my life. Yeah. Yeah.
So it was a good thing for you?
Was it good?
Good experience for you?
It was a wonderful experience. Like I said in one of my stories there, I wouldn't trade what I did for all the tea in China.